This is from 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 9. You must understand this, that in the last days distressing times will come. For people will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, inhuman, implacable, slanderers, profligates, brutes, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to the outward form of godliness but denying its power. Avoid them. From among them are those who make their way into households and captivate silly women, overwhelmed by their sins and swayed by all kinds of desires, who are always being instructed and can never arrive at the knowledge of the truth. As Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, so these people of corrupt mind and counterfeit faith also oppose the truth. But they will not make much progress because, as in the case of those two men, their folly will become plain to everyone. So, we also have a second vice list, included in verses 2 through 5, attributing these to the character of, people who would, teach or believe something that may be a little different than what Paul's teaching, and that, they have an outwardly form of godliness, but, they can't understand anything else. What's interesting about this passage was the denigrating comment towards women in verse 6. The silly women, overwhelmed by their sins and swayed by all kinds of desires. They're just too, gullible and, morally incontinent. That they're going to be, more susceptible to false teaching. And also verse 8 talks about Jannes and Jambres opposing Moses. Now, this is referring to the Egyptian magicians who opposed Moses in Exodus chapter 7. But in the book of Exodus, the magicians aren't named. The names Jannes and Jambres were invented in later Jewish extra-biblical tradition. So I'll include a link with more information about those guys. But it's really interesting that that made its way into the New Testament. And Titus, chapter 1, verses 10 through 16. There are also many rebellious people, idle talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision, Jewish Christians again. They must be silenced, since they are upsetting whole families by teaching for sordid gain what is not right to teach. It was one of them, their very own prophet, who said, "Cretans are always liars, vicious brutes, lazy gluttons." That testimony is true. For this reason, rebuke them sharply, so that they may become sound in the faith, not paying attention to Jewish myths or to commandments of those who reject the truth. To the pure, all things are pure, but to the corrupt and unbelieving, nothing is pure. Their very minds and consciences are corrupted. They profess to know God, but they deny him by their actions. They are detestable, disobedient, unfit for every good work. So, not only should the Jewish Christians, be rebuked sharply, but they must be silenced. No toleration for doctrinal differences at all. I find the dualistic implications of verse 15 interesting. To the pure, all things are pure, but to the corrupt and unbelieving, nothing is pure. So it's kind of like we're the privileged ones, and they're not. And I find it interesting in verse 14, it talks about not paying attention to Jewish myths, but in 1 Timothy, Jannes and Jambres are being referred to, and they're from extra biblical Jewish tradition, which you may call a myth. So. And then also in Titus, from chapter 3, verses 9 through 11, we again have, advice regarding dialogue or debate. But avoid stupid controversies, genealogies, dissensions, and quarrels about the law, for they are unprofitable and worthless. After a first and second admonition, have nothing more to do with anyone who causes divisions, since you know that such a person is perverted and sinful, being self-condemned. So, dialogue with someone who may disagree with the teachings of Paul should be done only to try to convince them of their viewpoint. And if they don't understand, and don't be and aren't convinced, then it's obvious, that they're just a pervert, and that they need to be avoided. Handing them over to Satan. In Titus 1:12, where it mentions, about the prophet, talking about the Jewish Christians being liars, vicious brutes, and lazy gluttons, that's a reference to the Greek poet Epimenides. Since when are Greek poets prophets? Are they prophets, when they serve a point you're trying to make? With all of these examples, it seems like the modern attitude of not necessarily ecumenism, but the toleration of doctrinal differences between different bodies of Christians. Sometimes mutually contradictory doctrinal differences seems not to come from the instruction of the writings of Paul, but seems to be happening in spite of it.